College basketball is nearly back, and that means WCC Wednesday is making a return. Today, myself and Tucky Clarry will discuss the WCC head coach power rankings, all right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Don't go away.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, it is October. I am so excited to be back 5 days a week on the Locked On Zags podcast, talking all things Gonzaga hoops. It is Wednesday. WCC Wednesday was a primary segment last year. We're bringing it back, kicking off the start of the college basketball season. I'm joined today by my friend Tucky Clarry. Tuck, for those unfamiliar, can you talk a little bit about where you're writing these days, where you're podcasting these days? We only got like 30 minutes. I know you've got a lot of different places that you're doing some content, but I'm sure people would love to hear where you're working right now.
Hey, Andy. Yeah. So I co-host the New Bloods podcast, looking at the WCC, Gonzaga, West Coast basketball in general, as well as the national landscape. I write a Substack, Hello Hoop World, breaking down previews for the season, as well as once the season gets away, some games to pay attention to for the week, a little reader guide. And I am ramping up Slip Your Soul Fits on SB Nation. We're doing our player previews. I just broke down Malachi Smith this week. And soon enough, we're going to do a WCC preview for Tristan Freeman and Busting Brackets. So ready to get this underway. The season is fast approaching, especially after all that hoopla about where Kentucky's playing Gonzaga.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was a fun morning today to wake up and see that the schedules came out, and there was some controversy. Our good friend John Calipari, the gift that keeps on giving for Gonzaga content creators in the off season. He's making it easy to find stuff to write about, stuff to talk about. We're not talking Calipari today, though. Plenty more opportunities to talk about our good friend John over there. But today, what I wanted to do, I'll explain it a little bit here. We're going to go through WCC head coach power rankings. It's going to be a short explanation because I intentionally didn't put a lot of rules in place. Tuck and I each made a list of the head coaches in the WCC, ranking them based on whatever we wanted to rank them on. For some of us, I'm sure that recent performances may be more important. For some, it's maybe the overall body of work. Just looking at all of the coaches, there's one new head coach. There's a couple pretty new head coaches in the WCC as well, guys who've only been coaching for a handful of years. There's also coaches who've been coaching for a really long time. Of course, Herb Sendek, Mark Few, Lorenzo Romar, been doing this for a long time. So I'm excited for us to kind of get an opportunity to really talk about the coaches in this conference. I think it's a very eclectic group of head coaches, and kind of see how we think about them as how they've done so far in their career and how they might be doing going forward. So I'm going to let you start it out, Tuck. What we're going to do here is each of us are going to go through our list in reverse order, keep some suspense about who's number one, although probably not too much suspense on that topic necessarily. But Tuck, I'm going to start with you. Just talk about who is your worst ranked head coach in the WCC, and perhaps why you have them in that spot.
Yeah. So my 10th ranked coach in this power rankings is going to have to be Leonard Perry at Pacific. Just not a lot has been going right with Pacific. Yeah. They're 8-22 since he took over. But also not a lot was going right with Idaho before that. 48-97 there. I think that it's a combination of resources, obviously, with those two schools. But if I'm looking to start a program, I'm not sure I'm looking in this direction. Fair or unfair?
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. Leonard Perry was my choice here. If we had not seen the Idaho stuff. I mean, 48-97 at Idaho. I mean, that's not going to get it done. Idaho, not a good basketball program, have not been a good, really sports program in a very long time, but that's still, I mean, it's just not enough. It's not enough. And then 8-22 at Pacific. If that's all we had on him, maybe there'd be a little bit more optimism, but he's coached not very good programs before and hasn't had a lot of success. For Pacific, losing Damon Stoudemire really hurt. It really hurt. I think there was a little bit of momentum there. They could have potentially done something with it, but Pacific it's in a rough area. It's a tough recruiting spot to be. And if you don't have like a really high end coach, it's going to be really hard to win there. And that's kind of what we've seen in the very short time that Perry's been the head coach over there. I'm going to move on to number 9. I'm curious if we're going to see so far, so good. 1 for 1. Number 9 for me, I was kind of close between two guys here. Ultimately, I ended up going up with Stan Johnson at LMU. Johnson went 11-18 last year. Not great. He was 13-9 in his first year, though. So there's a little bit of maybe he could turn some stuff around LMU. I think we just haven't seen enough to really get a great sense of where we're at here. But when you look at the other coaches in the conference, there just wasn't anybody that I felt deserved to be below him in what he's done so far.
Yeah. So I went with for my number 9, where Perry we have enough experience with Perry as a coach. I put Chris Gerlufsen as my number 9, just because you don't know what kind of commodity he is. I think that he could surely rise up this list throughout the season if things go right. He has the assets to. This is not an indictment on him as a coach. It's more just like, show me what you got. I mean, he was a big time facet for Hawaii's offense in the Big West. And I mean, obviously, if they're going to transition to a coach that's only been with the program for 2 years at San Francisco, he's got to have something going for him.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Gerlufsen is who I had at 8. I was really close. Do I want to have the brand new coach behind Stan Johnson, ahead of Stan Johnson? I was kind of him and hawing about what I wanted to do there. So I totally understand that decision. For me, I think you look at USF's track record of bringing in coaches or kind of developing coaches as associate head coaches or assistant coaches and bringing them up. They have had a lot of success. That doesn't automatically mean that this is going to be a big win. Certainly you're good at that until you're not. And it only takes one time for a coach to not really pan out that all of a sudden things kind of break down a little bit. But USF has seemed to be the Kyle Smith to Todd Golden to now Chris Gerlufsen. I have some optimism that this is going to go well. But yeah, it's hard to know where to place a coach that hasn't coached a single game yet. He hasn't done it yet. So we don't really know. Certainly Shantay Legans, who had coaching experience, he had a really successful first year in the conference. I'm sure Gerlufsen is looking to do something similar. He's got to build off of a much more successful previous regime. But I think that there's some optimism here. But right now, you got to show me what you got. You got to show me before I can move you up. Tuck, we got one more here before we go into the next segment. Who do you got at number 8?
So we're pretty much in alignment. Number 8 for me is Stan Johnson. I think you can't really make a lot of conclusions after last season. I was a couple rows back from their bench during the Gonzaga home game against them, and the vibes were atrocious, Andy. The vibes were real bad. Not a lot of eye contact between guys, not a lot of eye contact between coaches and players. I think that there was just a lot of personnel issues that season, a lot of high expectations as them maybe being a sleeper. That clearly didn't happen. Yeah. I think this season is going to tell us a lot with a couple fresh faces and then a platoon of guys that are his guys. This is only his 3rd season with the Lions.
Yeah, I think these make sense as the bottom 3 guys for me. Gerlufsen, Johnson, Leonard, Perry all have opportunities to make some growth. I can't pretend that I'm particularly optimistic about the direction Pacific is going, but certainly the other 2 programs, I could see some direction going forward in the future. I think that, we didn't even talk about this at the beginning. I think there's a pretty strong group of coaches. When I was doing this list and I was getting to like 6 or 7, which we'll talk about in the second segment coming up here, I was like, this is a pretty good group of coaches. Like some of these guys, I think there's some other conferences that are comparable to the WCC where they probably would be closer to the top 5. So it's a good group of coaches. We got the bottom 3 out of the way. We're going to come back in the second segment. We're going to look at some of those kind of mid-tier coaches, some of the other guys who've been coaching for quite a while here in the WCC. Before we get there, though, I want to tell you all about Nissan. Our partners at Nissan have worked with us to create a new segment across the Locked On College Network titled Thrilling Moments, where we highlight the most exciting play from the Zags' latest game or throughout the team's history. While we wait for the season to get started, we're going to highlight thrilling moments in program history, starting with the iconic shot that I hope never gets forgotten. It's not the Jalen Suggs shot. I don't think anybody's ever going to forget about that. But we're talking today about the iconic three-pointer from Jordan Matthews under 1 minute to go against West Virginia 2017 NCAA tournament. He hit that shot. The Zags had a very strong defensive stand right afterwards, led to a victory, trip to the Elite Eight. Of course, after that, a defeat against Xavier, a very narrow victory against South Carolina sent this team to their first ever national championship, one of the most exciting NCAA tournaments I've ever witnessed. Really, really exciting time to be a Gonzaga fan. This segment has been inspired by the thrilling new designs featured across Nissan's new lineup of vehicles. Pursue what thrills you in the all-new Frontier, Armada, or Pathfinder today. Available now at nissanusa.com. All right, segment number 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, still joined by Tucky Clarry. Tuck, I didn't mention this earlier, but I love the newsletter. You gave a little shout out to it earlier. If you're listening to this, not subscribed to Hello Hoop World, highly recommend checking it out. Fantastic stuff. But now I want to give you an opportunity to talk about who you have ranked 7th among WCC head coaches in your power rankings.
Andy, thank you for the kind words. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to give such kind words to the 7th coach, considering where many would probably have him.
Mm-hmm.
My 7th coach on this list is one Steve Lavin.
Ooh, okay, all right.
And the reason is I want to see it. I want to see what a coach that has not coached for over 7 seasons looks like. San Diego's a great retirement spot. Maybe he's getting a bag and hanging out on the beach. But considering the shakeup with his coaching personnel, considering I've heard several national media folks talk about how difficult it is to get a hold of him to talk about his team, down to the fact of I wasn't overly impressed with his time at St. John's as a head coach. I just don't understand the hype that we're seeing with this Toreros team or Steve Lavin under the reins.
I echo everything that you said. I didn't quite have him here. I had him a little bit higher than this. The coach that I had in this spot, and I'm sure that you have some thoughts on this coach as well, for number 7 is Lorenzo Romar at Pepperdine. I feel, and this is why I was close between Lavin and Romar, because I feel like I'm very much valuing what have you done for me lately. And Lavin hasn't done anything lately. He hasn't been a coach in the last 7 years, but Lorenzo Romar went 7-25 last year. I know that Pepperdine team, has they have really young, talented players. Houston Millett is a stud, Maxwell Lewis, like they got some dudes. I think this is going to be a good team, but they were really bad last year. You talk about a coach who's getting a bag and kind of just hanging out.
Malibu's a good place to hang out.
Malibu's not the worst place to do it. Obviously, Romar has he's won over 400 games in his career. Certainly that does count for something, but I had a hard time finding any stops where he has really overperformed or even not underperformed, quite frankly. So I'm not a huge Romar fan. He's a good recruiter. He seems like a great guy, but I just, from X's and O's, straight up coaching on the basketball court, I'm just not sure that I see it. And him and Lavin were very close to me. I was kind of unsure which one to put in that final spot. To be honest, I thought, if I put Lavin at 7, is that too low? But clearly not for you. I think that both these guys are kind of similar positions of older coaches who maybe aren't at the top of their game right now.
That's kind of a lead into my 6th spot, because I have Lorenzo at my 6th spot. And the reason I have Lorenzo at 6 is I agree with everything you said. And as a Gonzaga alum, I understand the vitriol that many Gonzaga fans have towards Lorenzo Romar and his UW days. But I will say this. We talked to Houston Millett and Maxwell Lewis on on the New Bloods podcast a couple of weeks ago, and hearing their perspective on how last season went, Lorenzo kind of let them figure it out. He thought it was like a learning moment for the team to really go into those valleys and figure out who the leader on that team is. Now, should a head coach be a little more assertive in fixing those problems? Arguably, yeah.
Sure.
I would say you would rather interject than go 7-20. But I will say, in a holistic sense of what being a head coach is, leading young men, recruiting, you can have a conversation about his X's and O's, but that young trio of Maxwell Lewis, Houston Millett, and Mike Mitchell are going to be fantastic this season. Absolutely. I am all in on the Pepperdine Waves, skyrocketing up this. And if they do so, I think Romar deserves to be in the 6th spot and maybe even the 5 spot. Yep. But I think ultimately, he's not a whole coach in a lot of aspects, but what he brings off the court seems to be something worthwhile.
Yeah, I definitely like that. I think I understand the sentiment there. And I think it's entirely possible that this time a year from now, or, in March from now, we're going to look at Pepperdine, who, let's say they might win like 16 games. And Steve Lavin's first year at USD, like, there's a lot of optimism. I'm just going to lead right into mine because I had Lavin next, as we probably guessed here. We'll continue to kind of pinball here. But like Lavin he's got some good players. Jaden Delaire from Stanford's fantastic. Eric Williams from Oregon is a good player. I think his ability to add some new players, and I say although there's a lot of reports that his staff ended up filling out a lot of the roster before he unceremoniously canned them, which was made a lot of headlines this summer for not some very great reasons for Steve Lavin over there. But we could be looking at a USD team that isn't even better than they were under Sam Scholl, whereas Pepperdine could take some leaps forward. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, what was all that hype about? What was all the optimism around Steve Lavin? He's been a high level coach. He's coached in the Big East. He's coached in the Pac-12. He's been in the NCAA tournament a whole bunch of times. He also hasn't coached since 2015. All the points that you made about him being a little bit difficult to reach, about, the controversy around what he did with his staff, like, it's a bit of a mixed bag right now, and he hasn't even coached a game with this team yet. So I'm excited to see what happens. I think it would be cool if USD was a little bit more relevant and kind of started making some of those steps forward, but I'm far from confident that that's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by how those transfers end up stacking up for him this season.
Tuck, who'd you have? We're getting in the top 5. Who did you have at number 5? Or did you do 6 already? I already lost track.
I did 6. I did 6.
Perfect. Who do you got at 5?
For 5, this may be surprising for a lot of folks, but number 5, I have Mark Pope.
Oh, that is surprising.
And the reason I have Mark Pope at 5 is looking at how that team has handled expectations over the last couple of seasons. He did reach the tournament 2 seasons ago. Last year, roster construction was pretty mediocre, to be kind. Yes, he lost 2 centers at the start of the season, but also those centers weren't necessarily world beaters, especially for a program that is supposed to be headed to the Big 12. And in this season, I have no idea where the Cougars are going to end up. A lot of national folks are preemptively penciling them into the 3 spot. And I do not see that with their losses versus who they got in the transfer portal. Their star freshman is going to go on a mission. In total, that roster just seems just completely uneven, and Traore can only do so much. Right. So with Mark Pope, it's just also, he seems like a coach that doesn't really make huge adjustments to what his roster construction was. He played last season as if he wasn't lacking 2 people over 6'9", and he wasn't playing a 6'5" or whatever center. So I think Pope is a solid, worthwhile coach. That's why he's on the 5th spot. But I think there's coaches that are far better tuning their roster to what they need or adjusting to what their roster can offer them.
We're going to talk about Pope a little bit later. I was very close to having him 4th. I ended up having him 3rd. So this is the farthest apart that we have been on any coach so far, although I definitely understand the sentiment. For me at number 5, and this almost felt too low. Perhaps it was too low, but I went with Portland's Shantay Legans here at number 5. I think when you look at Portland's history over the last half decade or so, or longer even, it's been a while since they had a coach that would even sniff the top 5 of the WCC. Eric Revenue was a good coach 12, 15 years ago, something like that. God, that makes me feel very old. When UP was in their heyday in like 2009, 2010, but it's been a pretty rough road since then. The Terry Porter era was a unmitigated disaster. There's absolutely no other way to look at what happened at UP during that time as anything other than that. Shantay Legans came in, immediately brought this team over 500, which 19-15 doesn't look great on paper, but when you look at where UP was prior to that, that is a tremendous accomplishment. To do that in 1 year, to turn this team around. They have a really talented roster. They got a couple guys from Eastern Washington, a couple other transfers in the mix that basically, if I'm not mistaken, turned over the entire roster from the Terry Porter era. To do that, win some games in the WCC. It's tough to be a low budget institution in the WCC. It's really hard. Portland's a big market. They're a big city, but it's a tough place to coach. I worked there for 2 years. It's really, really hard to find some success there. He did it. He did it in 1 year. Prior to his time at UP, he was Big Sky Coach of the Year in 2019. He went 75-49 while at Eastern Washington. This is a young, exciting coach on the rise. I think he's probably going to coach himself out of UP, quite frankly, which is unfortunate for the Pilots. It's unfortunate for the WCC. Not really unfortunate for Shantay Legans himself, though, because I think he's going to parlay his success here, assuming that it continues, into a really nice coaching career.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I have Shantay Legans as my fourth coach on this list, and that's because of all the things you listed. I think that he's one of the coaches that has clearly shown that he's able to do more with less. I mean, the fact that he was able to have any semblance of that success with a complete turnover of everything but walk-ons last season is remarkable.
Yeah.
I think that the success he had at Eastern is evident.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by this season in particular because he did so much or so little. And this season, he's going to have the ability to not play six-man rotation. He's going to have the ability to have a center in Joey St. Pierre that is actually of considerable size. I believe that Portland is going to be even higher than poachers are even suggesting they're going to be. And yeah, if that happens, it's going to be hard for Shantay to not listen to outside offers.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think I want to see what Shantay is able to do with a recruiting budget, with all of this, because I think that he's a special coach that is able to scheme with what he has in a way where if you're not working with dominant athletes, if you're not working with incredible sharpshooters, Portland shot pretty mediocre last season. And still they were competitive because of the style of play where it was interchangeable offense, switchability. Yeah. And that just is super exciting to see a coach try and outmaneuver his limitations.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke with Shantay on a podcast over the summer, and he was kind of talking about the Gonzaga game when they went out to Spokane. They played him there, and he was being a little self-deprecating about how the strategy that he took into that game didn't work because Gonzaga hit, I think 18 3-pointers, some obscene number of 3-pointers. And I remember thinking, and I think I talked to him about it, that's exactly how you need to make Gonzaga beat you. We've seen, you and I have both seen so many coaches who just seem content to let Drew Timme just crush them down low. And I'm like, if you're a roster like the one that he had last year, Drew Timme's going to kill you. Make Gonzaga beat you from beyond the arc. He did that. It didn't work because Gonzaga hit a whole bunch of threes. But that, to me, I was like, this is exactly how you had to attack this team. You tried exactly what you needed to do to make them beat you. And they did, because they were a better basketball team. There's not any debate about that. But to me, that kind of shows a coach who's willing to try things, to experiment, to figure out ways to potentially beat teams that may have better, bigger, faster athletes. And that's the kind of stuff that you need to do when you're coaching at a program like Eastern Washington, and certainly at a program like UP as well. Top 4 coming up for us, Tuck. I'm going to lead it off here with my 4th pick, who I'm guessing is probably your 3rd pick. That would be Herb Sendek at Santa Clara. Again, I've kind of tried to balance when you're talking about these coaches, how do you talk about what they've done very specifically lately versus their kind of whole body of work? For Sendek, both are pretty good. Both are good. He went 21-12 last year with the Broncos. He's 97-84 overall. Had the rough start a little bit at Santa Clara, but has been a lot better lately. I think when you inherit a program that maybe wasn't in the best spot, you're going to, your record's not always going to be reflective of how good of a coach you are. We're starting to see him kind of come out of that, put together some 20-win seasons. He's 53-33 over the last 3 years with the Broncos. He's also, made the NCAA tournament with Miami, made the NCAA tournament with NC State, made the NCAA tournament with Arizona State. He's had successful seasons or successful records at all 3 of those stops. He's been successful at Santa Clara. This is just a good coach. He's a good basketball coach. He knows his X's and O's. He recruits well depending on where he is. We've seen him have success at basically every single stop. And I think Santa Clara is going to continue to be, they may not quite reach that upper echelon. They haven't quite gotten there yet, but as long as Sendek's there, I think they're going to be close.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's my third pick. I think he's absolutely one of the most slept on coaches throughout college basketball. I think if you want to find a coach that finds talent and adjusts to the talent that he has, that's Herb Sendek. I mean, possibly the biggest what if for me last season is what happens if Joseph Bronkic does not get mononucleosis. That team was by far one of the best teams in this conference. I would say they would have pushed San Francisco into being the third best team in this conference. I think ultimately Herb has the bona fides. He has multiple lottery picks he took to the NBA draft, and Jalen Williams and James Harden and so on. He had routine success at NC State. He built that NC State program back up. I think, yes, he clearly struggled at the beginning. It was Santa Clara, but also that's a tough place to really get guys to commit to. And the way that he's able to build a program, the way that he made Jalen Williams feel like that is a special program, to the point that he told his brother Cody, hey, seriously consider this school. Please, I'm begging you, consider this school. I think that Herb Sendek is legitimately one of the better minds in just X's and O's and building up his guys and developing them.
Yeah, I have the same questions about what if that team had stayed healthy, if they hadn't dropped some of those non-conference games. This team blew out TCU in the non-conference slate. I think that TCU team wasn't quite the TCU team that we ended up seeing towards the end of the year, but regardless, that was still a huge win for this program. I think they're on the up and up. Sendek is the kind of coach who I think it's surprising to see him not even in the top 2, top 5, barely top 5 of the WCC, but it's kind of a testament to the top coaches in the conference. I'm going to close out the segment with my third pick. That's, of course, Mark Pope. I was really close between Pope and Sendek. I might have kind of talked myself / you might have talked me out of switching those two guys. 11 losses for Pope last year at BYU is pretty rough. 68-26 for his career, though. There have had success. In some ways, some of that success may be in spite of him, or at least not directly because of him. But they've recruited well. They've got some talent in that program. I think that we'll see if he's the guy to really kind of carry this program into the Big 12. I'm not incredibly sold just yet. I think he's going to get them there, but we'll see how long he lasts once they're there, particularly if they continue to struggle finding guys, like getting big guys, developing big men, not having big guys get hurt, which was obviously an issue for them in the past. And then beyond that, Pope was 77-56 at Utah Valley. Usually when a guy gets a job from a smaller program and jumps to a big program like BYU, big BYU's in the WCC, but it's a huge school. They're about to be in the Big 12. You're kind of expecting their record to be a little bit better at the stop before that. So I'm a little bit unsure on Mark Pope. I do think that he's a good coach. I think that he's gotten a lot out of some of the guys on that program that you maybe wouldn't have expected him to get out. But I'm not quite sold yet. I'm not sold that he's going to be a Power 5 coach. We'll see what that looks like if he's still the guy when they get into the Big 12. All right, we're going to come back in the third and final segment. We each got 2 left. Not really a shock who they're going to be, but we're still going to talk about those 2 coaches. We're going to talk a little bit about the WCC as a whole before we let you all go. But I want to tell you all about BetOnline. College basketball may be deep into the offseason, but college football and the NFL are just getting started while the MLB playoffs are about to begin. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. They even have lines for coaching changes across every major sport, so even in the offseason, you can get your fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, segment 3. Still Andy Patton, still locked on Zags, still chatting with Tucky Clarry here as we break down our final 2 coaches in our WCC head coach power rankings. Tuck, I got a pretty good feeling. I know who we're going to be talking about here. Can you talk to me about who your second coach is on your power rankings?
Yeah, my second coach is Mark. I'm just kidding. It's Randy Bennett. Randy Bennett is an incredible coach. He is absolutely one of the best 30 coaches in the country, probably higher. Circumstances, comfortability. I mean, like it's almost like some sort of like folk story of these 2 luminary coaches that are like 2 sides of a coin from each other in terms of like high powered offense versus high powered defense, slow tempo, high tempo. And the idea of like these 2 coaches that honestly could have gone through a bigger program in multiple spots, decided that they wanted to go with what they know. They wanted to go with what they're comfortable. They wanted to go with the region that they are very familiar with. And Randy Bennett at St. Mary's, 70.6% winning percentage. Like it's a guarantee. It's locked up. Choose St. Mary's to not finish second in this conference at your own peril. Like there's really no reason to ever consider anyone else. And frankly, if there was a scenario where Gonzaga was not in the WCC, I don't know how they wouldn't be like the Gonzaga light of the WCC, winning year in, year out. They're far more consistent than anyone that's been put up against them. The way that BYU thought that they were going to interject themselves into this conversation, and Randy Bennett took care of them routinely. And there's just a point where they are able to figure out the way to take on Gonzaga and limit what Gonzaga is good at in a way that few programs can, regardless of level of talent. His ability to coach players up. The story of Tommy Cusey is incredible. Tommy Cusey's on the San Antonio Spurs when he was a walk-on. Are you kidding me? The idea of Randy Bennett not getting his glory is absurd to me. And as much as Gonzaga fans like to make fun of him, the handshakes, all of that, he's absolutely essential for Gonzaga to be the program that it is today too. So.
I'm with you 100%. Randy's number 2 for me here in the WCC. You said top 30. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It would be hard for me to find 20 coaches that I would pick over Randy Bennett if I was picking a coach to lead my program. And he's a little ornery. The handshake stuff. The frustration of just the fact that it's a team that could upset Gonzaga every single time they play. But that is kind of a testament to what he is. He said 71% of the games he's won. The WCC certainly is not, it's not a power conference, obviously, but we're talking about there's a lot of good teams in this conference. And for Randy Bennett to continually take care of them, to pick off Gonzaga every once in a while, to have handled BYU the way that they did, like this is an extraordinarily successful coach. I would read a book. Maybe I'll write a book. Who the hell knows about the Randy Bennett, Mark Few, just like you said, the yin and the yang, so different. I think it's hilarious that there are these 2 coaches in the same conference, really, really successful programs. And I think that they almost never really compete with each other on the recruiting trail because they're looking at different types of players because their programs are so different. That's endlessly fascinating to me, the relationship that they have. There's a ton of mutual respect between the 2 sides, and there should be, because Randy Bennett really, really good at what he does. I think being the second best coach in this conference is a tremendous accomplishment. There's a lot of great coaches. And again, Randy Bennett's a top 25, maybe top 20 coach in the entire NCAA for me.
Andy, it gets down to the point where Mark Few's born in December 1962 and Randy's born in June of 1962. The summer and winters of time. They're the same age. They're polarizing figures. It's incredible. It's the feel-good movie of the summer.
All right. It sounds like I think we're going into business together. We're writing a book or creating a movie. I don't know. I guess we'll figure out, maybe both, about the Mark Few, Randy Bennett relationship. Tuck, I'm guessing I know who number 1 is. You want to talk a little bit about Mark Few?
Let us spit on Mark Few's excellency and supremacy. The way that like national media and fans in general like to move off to like some sexier, newer name, some rising coach, some rising act is just incredible to me because there's nothing more consistent than Mark Few is.
Yep.
And the idea that Mark Few is not winning coach of the year in the WCC year in and year out, the idea that Mark Few is not winning national coach of the year more than twice is incredible to me. There is no bigger guarantee than Mark Few winning the WCC title in the WCC tournament and making the Sweet 16. It is as big of a guarantee as you can get. It's to the point where, like, I don't know. I feel the same way about Bill Self, where we want to be smarter than everybody else about these great coaches, when those are frankly the two most successful coaches who are able to recruit, who are able to build their program to what they need. And Mark Few, there's just nobody that's been able to adapt to the college game and recruiting and the transfer portal, and then developing your own talent and finding recruits. The way he's completely adapted to even how the COVID season has gone on with high school players, where he's like, you know what? I understand that we just had 2 of the top 5 ranked players in these recruiting trail stories. But honestly, he's pivoted. He's now looking at the closest to NBA talent. He's finding the players that have accomplished something and have something left to prove that fit their program. I mean, Malachi Smith is honestly the biggest transfer fit that he could have gotten compared to anyone he could have gotten in the recruiting trail. So he's a mastermind of figuring out how to retain his talent.
Mark Few is endlessly fascinating to me because he's this really unassuming guy. He kind of just talks like he's just like this go-lucky guy who happens to, get to coach this team and happens to win some games. And like he's not flawless, but he does just about everything well. And his ability to identify players that perfectly fit his system. I know you just did a breakdown on Malachi Smith. I did one a while back, and I'm sure we came to similar conclusions of like looking at some of the advanced numbers and just also watching the tape and being like, this is perfect. Like, it's perfect. Look at Rasir Bolton is perfect. He fits exactly what they want. And like the transfer portal this last year, the big man, I know everybody wanted Dawes Amack. Everybody wanted Brome. But Efton Reed is a great fit. He's a great fit, especially when he committed before knowing whether Drew Timme was going to come back. It's perfect because he can develop. Gonzaga's ability to identify talent that fits their system and knowing when those guys are going to kind of be ready to contribute is unbelievable to me. To be able to be like, hey, Rui Hachimura is going to be on a couple-year plan, but he's going to be ready at this time. And this player, this player is going to be ready at this time. And Joel Ayayi, he's going to be ready at this time. And they seem to be just – it's so rare to see them have a misstep, to switch the starting lineup. And some people have criticized like, oh, he never switches the starting lineup. He does. It has happened. But it's rare in part because he got it right the first time. Like that's kind of what happened most of the time, is the ability to put the pieces together in a way to make this team as efficient, as productive, as good on offense and defense as he possibly can is something that I don't think Gonzaga fans take it for granted. I really don't. But I think that sometimes when it's like, why does he do this? There's criticism in ways that are just like, it's because he knows what he's doing. He gets it right almost every time. We're almost bored of it, which is just staggering. He's been here 22 years. He's made, NCAA tournament every single year as a coach. He was doing it well before he was getting recruits that anybody had even heard of, and now he's doing it while getting these recruits. And then, like you said, and then he stops getting those recruits and decides to pivot away from that and go towards a different way to roster build. We're still going to see a handful of recruits come in, guys like Braden Huff, guys like Dusty Stromer. And you know what? They're probably going to develop really well in the system and end up being better performers than where they were when they were recruited. That happens so frequently. And it's staggering the amount of success that he has had as the head coach of this program, and the amount, the different facets of what it takes to be a head coach. And he's just strong in basically every single one of them. It's going to be another great year for the Zags, and Mark's a huge part of it.
You have to be so talented and so good for people to get tired of you. You have to be so good to have Gonzaga fatigue. The fact that they have been a top 3 offense in KenPom the last 4 seasons, and 3 of them they were number 1. Right. The fact that 3 of the last 6 years they were the number 1 team in KenPom, and then you break it down to the fact of Adolph Rupp had a winning percentage of 82.2%. Rutgers is 83.6. Like, it boggles the mind how consistently great he is at finding the vantage.
Yep. Yeah, they get it done against everybody. I mean, I think Ken Pomeroy wrote a great article last year during the season of like taking their last 50 games against ranked opponents, and they won like 70% of them. Like he's not just doing it against, Pacific, which is what a lot of people like to tell you out there, but that's not true. He's doing it against everybody. There's a reason they've been to 7 straight Sweet 16s. It's just a staggering success for this program. I'm very excited for this upcoming season, Tuck. This conversation made me feel even more pumped about what we got going in the WCC. I think it's going to be a really, really fun season. And I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Andy. I love talking WCC and the Zags.
All right, that is going to do it for me today. For more, check out the website, scorezagscored.com. We got plenty more fun stuff coming later this week. We're going to continue the season preview series. Fun guests coming later on the show as well, right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Available wherever you get your podcasts, available on YouTube as well. Go hit that subscribe button if you haven't done it yet. Trying to get to 1,000 before November 7th when the Zags tip off against North Florida. So go check that out there. Finally, thank you again for making Locked On Zags your first listen of the day. Locked On WCC doesn't exist yet. Maybe Tuck will take it over someday. But you can get more informed on the West Coast happenings right now by making Locked On Pac-12 your second listen of the day. Host Spencer McLaughlin and the local experts of Locked On take you across the Pac-12 in 30 minutes, 5 times per week. All right, thank you all for listening, and go Zags.